We are really excited to be with you today as we talk about generational dynamics in the workplace. I think personally, this is one of the most important topics for leaders as they think about where our country is, where the workplace is, and nonprofit is. For the first time in the history of our country, we actually have 4 generations that equally represent the workforce. We've got baby boomers, Gen X, Millennials, and Gen Z, who all represent about 20% of the workforce. There's a few others on either side, but they equally represent that for the first time in the history of our country. And so we're going to get the opportunity to talk about that. As you guys have thought about this, why is it for you such an important topic to talk about and to know?
Well, I was thinking with the variations of how generations change. So generation studies is kind of interesting because they try and create themes that fit each generation. And if you look at each one of those, you're spanning from birth years in the 40s to birth years in the 2000s. That's a big span. And so understanding these differences is going to help you, every leader and person in the organization, communicate more effectively, interact more effectively, and even just have a better team dynamic because we know how important culture is to our organization. So you have to understand who's in your organization.
Yeah. And I think you also have to understand kind of like what bent they come from, what generation they come from, and how they process information, the way that they communicate, the way that they think about things. How about for you guys?
Well, if you've got all of these different groups of people represented in your organization, you can't treat, it's not a one size fits all. So you can't treat each person exactly the same. So you've got to know what's going to reach one group of people, what's going to reach the other. It's just important to know the different demographics that are present so you can meet the needs of those who you're leading.
Yeah, and I think each of them come with different needs, right? They come with different expectations. They've grown up differently. You think about baby boomers, they grew up for a large part of their leadership without a significant amount of technology. Like when you said to go to your phone, they just went to a phone. Now we have to go to the phone part of our phone, right? And so that's a good point. How about for you, Casey?
Yeah, I agree with Erica and what you guys are saying. I think there's a lot of different ways that these generations are operating, and I think communication could be different. And then if people are speaking in different languages, so to speak, whether technology or just different ways of communicating in person, then I think it will be very confusing. So you have to learn how to work together in that way. And so it's like finding a blend between all the generations.
Yeah, and I think it's there's a real fine line right now in how to lead and do that well, because you've really got 4 unique generations that come with very unique needs, very different ways of receiving and giving communication and feedback, which we will get into in a little bit. One of the challenges that these generations face is sometimes they get stereotyped into a certain way, like, oh, you're a young person, you think this way, or, you're at the end of your career, you're going to think about it this way. Why is it important to avoid stereotyping as a leader?
Well, I loved how you framed that, Billy, because you think of the extremes, right? Stereotyping is just assuming everyone's the same, but we have to remember each person's unique and an original. But at the same time, there are characteristics that do overlap. And so walking that fine line of, hey, I know some general themes. My job as a leader is to test it and to make sure I know my individuals uniquely. Because with generational theory, what's interesting is you have a blurring between the two. So if you were born, Gen Z is defined anywhere from 1995 to 2000 as the start of it. Well, if you were born in those years up to 2005, you're a blending of the two. And then it gets a little bit more defined with Gen Z going forward. And then you have the pandemic, which has really shaped Gen Z as they were into the workforce, because they were the generation that really was affected with, oh, we're working at home now. Oh, this is changing. School's changed. So understanding those uniqueness, but bringing it back to the individual is kind of the role of the leader in the organization to say, yeah, we understand the themes, but let's see what's true for our people, because each needs an individual is different. What do you think about those?
Yeah, I immediately think about, I coach student athletes, college athletes. So they would be your Gen Zers. And as a millennial who was coached by Gen Xers and boomers, I cannot coach my Gen Z athletes the way that I was coached. Now, there are aspects of what those coaches gave to me that I want to impart into my coaching and my leading. However, I have to meet those Gen Zers where they are. And that's the way that I communicate, the way that I challenge them, the way that I push them. And I think initially in my coaching career, I thought, man, this group is very difficult. They're stubborn. They're really hard to work with. But I had to realize, no, there's a gap here, and I've got to be the one as the leader to close it. And so they are incredibly hardworking. They are curious. They are really intellectual, and they just want to know why they're doing what they're doing. So I just had to learn to meet them where they are. So instead of just saying, do this, and in the past, when a coach said that to me, it was, you don't ask any questions, you just do what you're told. Yeah. Now I had to realize, okay, let me give them some information up front so that they're more willing to buy into what I'm saying. And it dramatically increased the way that we were able to work together. And that's what it is. It's us working together across our generational differences.
Right.
When I was playing high school basketball just a little while ago, my head coach told me I needed to remove every pass out of my repertoire. He said my passing was so bad, there isn't one pass that I can do. And I was like, oh, okay. I guess my question for you is, how do you go about trying to get to know each of your athletes then? Like, what do you do to make sure that you know enough about them so that you can meet them, but you can also provide an expectation where they still have to work hard and perform? How do you balance that?
Yeah, it's, I set the standard up front that, we're going to work hard. We have goals that we want to reach. And I meet with each one of the athletes individually to talk about what are their specific goals for them as individuals. And it's track and field, so largely an independent sport. So what are your goals? But then I'm also really, I'm really intentional about connecting with them outside of athletics. It's important that I know who they are as a whole person. And I care about them holistically anyways. Yeah. So what are you interested in outside of sports? What's your family dynamic? Where do you come from? That also allows me to meet their needs when they are stressed and when they are frustrated or they are emotional about something. It's not always just athletics related. A lot of times it's something from the outside that's coming in. So it's just getting to know the person as an individual and recognizing that they are actually an individual.
Yeah. Well, Erica, you made a great point, because I'm seeing it more so even across generations. You can see it's leaking up. The reason to know why. We've lost the edge of where you just do it because it's you were told. People want to know why. How's it work? And a lot of, especially the younger generation that has lived a much more integrated life with their phone, with social media, with just experiences of what they can learn online. How does this fit? Like, why is what I'm doing now contributing to the overall goal of the organization? Why do you want me to do it this way so I know how it impacts others? All these things that we used to take for granted or not have to be said now need to be said. Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't just say that's generational. That's going across the board. More and more people want to know, how do I fit in here with the big picture, and why does it matter?
Yeah. I was going to say, we are more than just our generational stereotypes as well. We're very complex, and it depends on how we were raised. Our environment, our religion can really change how we operate as well. So that's why we can't stereotype, because everyone comes from different things. We're not just, this generation, Gen X, Gen Z, but we have unique lives or things that have shaped us that can make us who we are.
So I would just say, and I think this is what we're all echoing, is if you don't start with a basic understanding that knowing the people you're leading well first, the topic around understanding generational dynamics will never get there. You have to know the individual first. Let's talk a little bit about how this hits in some of the core focuses of leadership. I think the three of us would agree that communication is a lot like the circulatory system of the body. It hits every aspect. And in every client we work with, almost everyone, communication ends up being an issue, right? How does communication as a core issue relate to this idea of generational differences?
Well, again, a lot of this is happening to me practically in real time as I'm coaching student athletes. But I think, man, there were so many things initially that I thought about Gen Z and the way they communicate. I hate labeling them that, but I thought so much was disrespectful. And again, that comes from how I was raised and the way that the expectations put on me. But I had to realize, no, they're just inquisitive. They want to understand. And so it's not disrespect. So it's, again, you were talking about the nuances of who we are, and it's more than just generational differences. I mean, I also worked in education for 7 years, and a lot of what we were teaching our students was ask questions. Don't just take someone for the straightforward word. Do your own research, pry, dig deeper, get more knowledge about whatever it is. So it's what we're doing. We're training our students this way, and then we get surprised when that's what they give to us.
And you think about these 4 different generations, and by the way, we mean this with the greatest respect, right? We're just talking about how an alignment of culture and age and experience kind of come together. And if you're not thinking through how to strategically speak to each of these generations at some point within your organization, there's a good chance that you'll miss someone or you'll miss a larger group. Dave, would you agree with that?
Oh, fully. And studies are showing that Gen Z is quitting or being dismissed at a faster rate than traditional generations because organizations haven't made that switch. You can't assume this is how we've always done it because, when you're spanning 60 years of organizational learning that's happened, we are training students differently in schools. We're much more exploratory, we're much more participatory, interactive. So they come into a work environment, they're expecting those same skills. Hey, I did a bunch of group work in college. Where my group work here? Hey, I did a bunch of understanding the goals and dreaming and others. Where do I get to do that here? As opposed to I'm just kind of a cog in a machine wheel. So it's so important to look at this and to say, wow, maybe how I had experienced an organizational life, how do I need to make it different for the next generation? Because they're coming at it from a completely different starting point than we ever did. And really, leaders have to be the bridge. It's our job to build the bridge. You can't just say, well, I'm never going to hire anybody younger than this age, and I'm only going to hire, because you're missing out on what they bring and the dynamics, especially in technology and, communications. I am not very good on Teams, but other groups and students I work with, they're using Teams, Slack, all of that just to communicate at a different level at the speed that I'm not at when I teach. And I'm like, okay, I have to learn from them. They have to teach. I have to be humbled to learn, teach me how this works, why it's better to do it this way than the way I've always done it. And that takes the leader thinking differently.
Well, let me ask you this one, because I think we could go in a number of different directions around these core issues, whether it's feedback, supervision, just how you navigate emerging leaders. But let's talk a little bit about work-life balance, right? How does this intersect within these kind of 4 generations that we've identified? Baby boomers, Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z.
I think right now, Gen Z and millennials probably care, it seems like, the most about those things. Not that the others don't, but it seems like that is like one of their main priorities when working. They want to be able to go to their job, but they want to be able to have life outside of it. They want to be able to hang out with their friends or their family or whatever their hobbies are. I think it's very big for them, and it's a defining factor in a job for them right now.
And I think actually some of them, they want a quality of life and work balance within their job. Right? They want to have lunches and friendships, and they want to know that they're a part of something bigger than themselves. Whereas, I think baby boomers were like, I work and then I have a life outside of work. I think some of those generations want to have that same balance within their job as well. Erica, how about for you?
Yeah, I mean, the flexibility piece is really important. And I think about my time here at the center and coming into this job, one of the most appealing factors was the flexibility of the job. I could kind of make my schedule for the most part. We tend to be in the office, but we also have opportunities to work outside of the office. So, I mean, that flexibility was very attractive. I think myself and also a lot of millennials care a lot about, bigger causes than themselves, and they want to be involved in different things. And so it gives me the room to do that. But also, if I feel like I'm bogged down all the time at work, I don't now have the energy to give myself to other things that also speak to, my identity and what drives me and motivates me, because you don't always have all of that wrapped up in your job. And I think that that's okay.
Some studies have been done on even Gen Z, the younger generations entering, they don't want fully remote, even though that's kind of where we were taught during the pandemic of, everybody wants remote, and now there's this struggle. Some people want back to office 5 days a week. Some people want remote. But the studies have shown the sweet spot is a hybrid where the employee gets to help speak into what hybrid looks like, where they get to decide what fits for them so that they have more agency. And then at work, the culture, if there's one stressor is as you're blending generations and you're blending different backgrounds, remembering each person as an individual, but what culture are you trying to build? We do a lot of teamwork on organizational culture because that is, if communication is circulatory, The culture is the air you swim in. And do people want to be in the office? Because younger generations want mentoring. They want more feedback. They want more, more conversations with people. They don't want to just be an island unto themselves. So when older generations don't need as much as that, because we've been kind of trained that hasn't been given. It was just kind of, you just go do your work and you're kind of a solo entrepreneur in some situations. So yeah, blending that becomes the dance that leadership gets to do.
Yeah, you guys have given some great insight. And just as I close, I think it's important to know that these generational dynamics are a new responsibility for leaders. And the more that you invest in knowing the people you lead and the generational way in which they see life balance, communication, culture, feedback, performance reviews, it doesn't take away from still having the need for expectations, for people still being able to have to deliver kind of what the expectations of that job are. But I've found, and we found in the leaders we've worked with, when you invest in understanding those unique character traits of each generation, it makes the way in which you lead and ultimately the performance that you have so much better. Thanks for being with us today.